Hi, everyone. Welcome to the HMIS Case Management Role Training. Usually this training is done in person and you're able to ask questions and brainstorm with a group of people and get on the computer to actually explore the database. So if you're a little confused after this webinar, that makes sense. I think this will be a good starting place, but I definitely anticipate there being questions. So please feel free to reach out to us. This is our email address here at the top, hmis@auw.org. This is usually an agenda that this is an agenda. We usually hand it out at the beginning of each training session. And I want to show you that on the second page, there are navigation paths or click paths. This shows you how to get to certain places to accomplish certain tasks like viewing enrollment history, enrolling a client in a program. So throughout the video, I'll be saying this navigation path is on the agenda, and this is what I'm referring to here. I will email this to you so that you have it and can refer to it throughout the training if you like, but you'll definitely want to hold on to this paper. I think some people have it like stapled to their wall or something so that they can refer back to it. We're going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to go over the intake forms. There are going to be some questions at the end of this. I will send you a link to a Google Doc and you can fill in the answers. If you watch the video that I send, it will be very obvious what the answers to those questions are. There are no gotcha questions. I'm not trying to trip anybody up. I just want to make sure that this video is watched because there are a lot of very important topics that are covered here. So we will start going over forms, like I said. I'm going to break this up into two videos. This first part will probably be a half hour to 45 minutes, and then we'll get into the database. We're going to go through an actual enrollment and then talk about some concepts. That one will be a little longer, probably an hour to an hour and a half. Usually the in-person training is about 3 hours. So what's nice is you guys can pause this whenever you want, but please just make sure that you listen to it in its entirety. Okay, so case management training, let's go ahead and get started. So generally when you are working with clients, you are providing some kind of service or you're building a relationship. You're gathering some sort of data to prove that you have provided those services and to enroll clients into programs. You might use an outreach, one-page outreach form. Maybe you have a 6-page intake form for a shelter or for sort of housing program. Maybe you have a VI SPDAP form. Regardless of the kind of form, you're still gathering data from clients. And once you have that data, you sit down at the computer and you enter it into a website called CaseWorthy. CaseWorthy is our homeless management information system. It's our HMIS. So if you hear CaseWorthy or you hear HMIS, those are the same things. It's the database where you enter client information. So you enter that information into CaseWorthy and you might ask yourself, what is the point of this? Why do I have to spend all this time entering this information? And the value of entering the information is really the communication and the coordination that this database provides. So if you are providing services, if you are enrolling your client into an outreach program, if you are gathering documents, other people are able to see that. And other people are able to benefit from the work that you've done, just like you're able to benefit from the work that other people have done. So if somebody has been gathering documents for a client and they upload that into CaseWorthy, maybe another person who houses the client can see this client already has their ID, I don't have to spend the time getting it. Or this client already has their verification of homelessness, I don't have to gather that. You can also see the organizations the client has been involved in. You can see the case managers who have worked directly with the client. And so if you have questions, you know who to get in contact with. If your client is hesitant to share information information with you, this can be a good starting place because you can see where they've been and maybe know what questions to ask as you continue to build the relationship with them. Okay, this training is for a variety of different service providers. It's for outreach workers, shelter workers, people who house clients. So some of the things I say are appropriate for some service providers and not for the others. So you kind of have to figure out what applies to you directly with your situation and with your organization. So going back to this, the value of it, there's the communication coordination piece, and then there's also the funding piece. A lot of funders mandate that information be put into CaseWorthy, and they look at that information to see how well an organization is performing. So it's not a fun piece to talk about, but it's hugely critical because some organizations have lost funding based on the information in CaseWorthy. Some organizations have been able to prove that we are really effective at meeting our goals. We have the data to back that up. So that's kind of the overview of entering data into our database called CaseWorthy and the reasons for it. If you ever have questions about how to enter data or error messages that you're getting or a mistake that you've made, because we all make them, please reach out to us at hmis@auw.org. We are very happy to help. It's helpful if you have a screenshot so that we can see exactly what the issue is. It's helpful if you can send a client ID so that we know what to look at when we're trying to troubleshoot. But if we'll ask you for that information if you don't provide it up front. Okay. So we're going to dive into intake forms. This is a 6-page packet, and it's specifically for outreach and emergency shelters and safe havens. We can see that up here at the top. Sorry, I'm kind of learning how to use this. We can see that up here at the top. Make sure that you're using the correct form because different forms do collect different kinds of data. And you would talk to your organization about the exact forms to use. Okay. So right off the bat, as we're going through this, a couple things I want to talk about is, before we even get to that, what we have here is anything with an asterisk must be answered. And if we look here, we can see where the asterisks are. And honestly, most of the questions on this form have to be answered, so just please be aware of that. If data is not collected, if you don't have an answer to a question, the database wants to know why. They want to know, does the client not know it? So maybe with their social security number, maybe the client doesn't know what their social security number is. Maybe they don't trust you enough yet to provide that information. Or maybe you didn't ask the question. So whatever the reason, you would just want to select the right option. If you say client doesn't know, that tells us something. If you say client refused, that tells us something else. If you say data not collected, that kind of tells the system that you didn't ask the question, and it kind of looks like you didn't do your job in its completeness. So please make sure that you are asking all the questions, but that you're selecting the correct option here as necessary. Okay. Something else that I want to talk about here, we have a double asterisk. If you are talking with somebody about their citizenship status, if somebody says that they're a non-U.S. citizen from a COFA country, COFA stands for Compact of Free Association, and we can see that there's a double asterisk after COFA. Anytime there's a double asterisk, there's a follow-up question. You only have to answer this follow-up question if somebody provides a response with a double asterisk. If they provide any other response, this question, if COFA, will not show up. One thing that might happen, and is very likely to happen actually, is you ask somebody their citizenship status and they'll say that they are from the Marshall Islands, they're Marshallese. You would have to know that, okay, that means they're from a COFA country. So you would have to kind of answer this question and then fill in this part after. All right. Okay. Next up, we have relationship to head of household. When you're talking about relationship to head of household, you're not talking about like tax status or somebody being actually married with a marriage certificate. The family structures in CaseWorthy are very fluid, and it's because our clients have their family structures change so frequently. So you might have somebody who enrolls in an emergency shelter by themselves, and they are the head of household. And then they might go into, if they receive housing, they might show up for a housing voucher with not just them, but a wife and kids. In that case, they would have two different families, one where they're by themselves and one where they're with the family. Just please be aware, families get complicated. Just please be aware that the head of household status can be changed as necessary. So if you have a family that enrolls in a program and then the head of household decides to leave, but everybody else stays, you can change who the head of household is, okay? And we'll see how to do that at the end, but it's really best to either ask somebody at your organization or to reach out to the HMIS team if you have questions on anything to do with families. It can be a mess, but there's a path through the chaos is kind of what I want to say with that. Okay. Moving on to page 2, we have another example of the follow-up questions where there's a double asterisk. So if somebody says they're Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or if they're Asian, we want to know more specific information about that. Please gather this information for every person. CaseWorthy makes you enter it for heads of household. It does not make you enter it for spouses or children or grandparents, but please enter it anyway so that we have complete records for every client. Okay, this is the first thing on the questionnaire at the end. I told you there are no gotcha questions, so it's going to be very clear what the questions are. We're talking about consent forms. Every single client must have a consent form uploaded to their record. The question on the questionnaire is, what document must be on every client's record? The answer is consent forms. If a client signs a consent form, they are consenting for you to share their information with the other organizations in our COC. You're also able to share their information with our CES team, our coordinated entry team, so that that client is eligible for housing referrals and housing services. If a client declines to share their information, if no is selected here, the client is saying, I only want to receive services from your organization and you can't tell anybody else about it. That means that if they have an enrollment at your emergency shelter and they go to another organization, that organization cannot see that enrollment. It also means that the CES team cannot see the client on the by name list and the client cannot receive housing referrals. So please make sure that you are having consent forms signed. Best practice is to have a consent form attached to the front of each packet and to get a signature every time you're doing an intake form. One reason for that is that consent forms are valid for only 3 years. So if the consent form reaches the 3-year mark, this date of consent is more than 3 years old, the system will default to no. It will default to this client's information is restricted. So consent forms are valid for 3 years. They must be uploaded. If you have a client who is hesitant to share their information, please try to figure out why. Maybe they're not sure what you're going to do with it. Maybe they're worried that you're going to share it with a landlord or with a family member. You can assure them that you're not going to, and that this information is only used by people who are trying to provide services and get them housed. Okay. If you have any questions on consent forms, it's hugely, hugely crucial to reach out to HMIS or to somebody else in your organization to make sure that you understand it. The other thing I want to point out on this screen is the enrollment entry date right down here. It's at the bottom. In CaseWorthy, this will default to the day you start entering data. Please make sure that if you're entering the data after the client has started receiving services, let's say that they started receiving services on Monday and you enter the data on Wednesday, please make the enrollment entry date be the actual day they started receiving services. So you would just type right over it in CaseWorthy, and we'll see that when we get into the database. With our COC, the goal is to enter all data within 72 hours. That's actually a metric that's measured and that funders see. Some organizations have a 24-hour data entry timeline, so please check with your organization to see how soon you need to enter the data after gathering it. Okay. All right, let's move on to page 3. Okay, page 3 is a super important, super fun page. There's a couple of important concepts. First of all, this particular form, when you're doing intake forms like this is not a script. You are able to ask the questions out of order. You're able to put it into your own words. You're able to let the conversation flow. You need to gather all the information, but there's a little bit more flexibility than there is when you're doing the VI Spit App. For example, with disabling conditions, we have the question here, but if we go to the next page, to page 4, we can see that the disabling conditions themselves are laid out in detail here, and it actually continues on to page 5. So if you're not sure what disabling conditions are when you're on this page, you can kind of wait to fill this part out until after you have asked the specific disabling conditions questions, okay? And that's just an example of how you have a little bit more leeway in how you gather this data. We'll talk more specifically about disabling conditions when we get to the next page. The next part of this form, where we have living situation, this part of the form is trying to establish whether the client is chronically homeless. And there's a lot of important information here. So first of all, to be considered homeless, a client must be in one of these situations here. So they're staying in an emergency shelter, or they're in a place not meant for habitation. This is what we would probably think of traditionally as somebody being homeless. They're on the streets, in a beach park, sleeping in their car. They're in a condemned building. Those would all be places not meant for habitation. Those people are considered homeless. If we move on to other sections of this form, we have institutional situations. This would be like hospitals and prisons, and you can see psychiatric hospitals, substance abuse or treatment facilities. Once the client, we'll come back to this, but once the client has been in one of these institutional settings for 3 months, they are considered housed. Even if they don't have a place to go afterwards, once they hit that 3-month mark, they're housed. Kind of similarly, if we come over here to this side where we have transitional and permanent housing situation, once a client has been here for 7 days, they are considered housed. A couple of things that frequently come up on this page is that if a client is couch surfing, they are staying in a family member's room, apartment, or house, or a friend's room, apartment, or house. You can see that once they've been there for 7 days, they're considered housed. If families are doubled up and they've been there for 7 days, they are also considered housed. So I just want to go over that because that's a frequent question. This is decided by HUD, by the Office of Housing and Urban Development. We did not make these decisions, but that's going to be important to know because we are going to start talking about chronic homelessness. And to be chronically homeless, a client must have a disabling condition. So the answer here must be yes. A client must have a disabling condition, and then there's also a time factor. They have to have been homeless for 12 months continuously, at least, or over the last 3 years, they had to have been homeless 4 times, totaling 12 months. Okay, I recommend pausing the video here and writing this down because it's really important to know. What I have is 4 periods of homelessness over 3 years, totaling 12 months. Okay, and we'll keep talking about this when we get to this part down here. Down here. Okay, length of stay in prior living situation. Let's say that a client has been staying in their car. And you ask them, where did you stay last night? I stayed in my car. You get to this length of stay in prior living situation question. The next question is, okay, how long were you in your car? And whatever answer they give you is the answer to this question. The next question, approximate date homelessness started. This is trying to capture people who move from homeless situation to homeless situation. So maybe somebody's in an emergency shelter, and remember, emergency shelter is a homeless situation. Somebody's in an emergency shelter, and then they go to stay at the beach park, and then they go and stay with a friend for 2 nights, and then they go back to the beach park. That client has been homeless. that entire time. So we want, when did that whole period of homelessness begin? HUD recognizes that it's difficult to get an exact day. If people have been homeless for a long time, they might not remember when they became homeless. As best you can, please narrow it down to the month and the year. And so if you can get somebody's answer of July 2017, you can put the first of the month, July 1st, 2017. Feedback I've gotten from service providers is it's best to work backwards with this. So to say, okay, last night you were staying in your car, where were you before that? How about before that? How about before that? And to move back over a period of 3 years. If clients get kind of stuck and they can't remember where they were, try to tie it to seasons or to holidays, just anything that might kind of jog their memory. The next question that we have is number of times the client has been in the streets, an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. So the number of times, that's where the 3 months and the 7 days becomes important. So let's say that we have a client who's sleeping in their car, and then they go to a substance abuse treatment facility, and then they go back to their car. If they were in that substance abuse treatment facility for more than 3 months, they were housed for that time. So when they go back to their car, that's the second period of homelessness. If they were in that substance abuse treatment facility for less than 3 months, then they were never considered housed. And that's one long period of homelessness. Same thing over here, except it's now 7 days. If you have questions on that, please definitely reach out because it's a really important concept. It helps determine whether somebody is chronically homeless, and if somebody is considered chronically homeless, they're eligible for more supportive housing placements, and they're prioritized higher on our by name list, which is the report that generates or helps CES determine housing referrals. So chronic homelessness is a huge concept to understand. The data entry is really important. On the HMIS team, we frequently get questions from people asking us to change somebody's chronically homeless status. We're not able to do that. It's based solely on the information that is entered here. So please make sure that you enter the information correctly and ask questions if you're not sure about it. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next page. So we are on page 4, and there are questions about domestic violence, about non-cash benefits, and health insurance. I want to focus on disabling conditions. We talked about this just a little bit before, and we're going to kind of dive into it now. All the questions on this form are self-reported information, so we go with what the client says. If a client, and we're going to come back to this concept when we get into the database, but if a client says that, no, I don't have, I never drink, I never do drugs, and you think that's not the case, but you push a little bit and they still say, no, but I don't do that. Let's say they say that when you do this intake. And then a month later, after working with them, they say, yeah, I do drugs, and I've been kicked out of housing a lot, and I've been doing it for the past 10 years. You would want to go back and change the answer to this question, and you would want to do that by editing. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind, that if a client reveals information that they first provided was not true, and then they give you the accurate information after the relationship has been developed a little bit, after there's more trust, you can go back and edit the information. Okay, we want this data to be accurate as of the date on the enrollment. If you have questions on that, it's kind of a big concept. If you have questions on that, please let us know and we can clarify some. The other thing that I want to talk about here is that this is self-reported information, but a lot of times we need documentation to back this up. So if somebody says that they have a developmental disability or a chronic health problem, you would need to get in touch with some type of medical professional. For some of these, mental health counselors or therapists or they have other case management, you would want to get in touch with those other people so that they could provide letters of verification. Some housing programs require that documentation before a client can be housed, and we want to have that documentation in place so that referrals aren't sitting empty, just looking for people who kind of are ready to be housed based on documentation. Yeah, again, if you have questions, please reach out about that. Also, all these documents that we're talking about can be uploaded into CaseWorthy, so they're kind of in a safe spot and everybody has access to it, and you're not asking clients to hold on to important documents through sweeps and lots of movements and potential water damage and all that. Okay. The disabling conditions continue on this page. We have HIV, AIDS, and physical disabilities. For a condition to be disabling, there's a couple of things that it needs to be expected to be of long continued and indefinite duration and to substantially impair somebody's ability to live independently. So for them to have a disabling condition, we would have to click yes here and then also yes below for it to count. Okay. All right, we have questions on HUD health insurance and HUD financial. And then this last page is Hawaii-specific questions. Hawaii is the only state that asks these questions. You can read through them, but it's asking when they arrived, how long they've been in Hawaii, when they arrived, marital status, criminal justice status, referral information. And then at the bottom, they're asking about use of emergency services. We're trying to track how clients are kind of replacing housing with hospital stays. So please make sure that this one doesn't have a star by it, so technically you don't have to answer it, but please gather this information anyway so that we can prove a need for funding. That's something else that this data helps us do. All right, so that is the end of the paper form. I know that was really fast. I want to highlight a couple of things. Ask every question. Again, you can kind of paraphrase and have this be a guided conversation, so it's okay if it's a little out of order, but have all the data before you enter it into CaseWorthy. Upload consent forms for every client. This is on the questionnaire that comes later. Families are tricky. You can change family status. You can add new families. So one client can have multiple families that they're with, kind of like, if you grow up with parents and then you get married or you have a partner, your family has kind of changed. So you have a new family. That can happen with our clients, and we want that reflected in CaseWorthy. Please reach out for assistance. Chronic homeless status is a really important page. So enter that data, gather that data carefully. And then, like I said before, this is a guided conversation. It's based on self-reported information. So you have a little bit of leeway with this. Okay, so this is the first part of the training. I'm going to stop this video, and there will be a second link for you to click on to actually go through the database.